On the first day of the week at early dawn, in setting the context that way, Luke is preparing us for a new beginning. Something different has begun. And yet, Jesus' closest followers are still living in an old world that is yet to change, or so they thought. A paradigm where death had the power to speak the final word. And before we get too far down the path of this story, I have no intentions of blaming or ostracizing those followers for not believing. In fact, the faithfulness of Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other women who were there is admirable. For on this new day and in the midst of this new week, in a reality they could not yet comprehend, they still showed up. And as they went to the tomb, the place where they had last seen Jesus when they laid him there, they took burial spices that they might honor him. Indeed, in a world where death had the final word, their acts of devotion are a sign of their love, indeed mixed with sorrow. But as Luke has already tipped us, dear reader, in this new kind of week and at the start of a new day, they are no longer living in a world where death's spices are needed. As the women arrived, there was no body there. Instead, dazzling messengers appeared. And as much as the messengers may seem to be the news or the spectacle of that moment, what they have to say is the point. The messengers asked the women, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here." Let's try this out. Christ is risen?
Christ is risen indeed.
Indeed. And that question to the women, "Why do you look for him here?" was a gentle kind of rebuke, not so much as to shame or criticize the women, but it was enough to jostle them and to uproot them from that old paradigm. The question began the work of setting them free from the entanglements of death's power, allowing them to take their first steps into that new day that came at the start of a new week, one that signals a new world. And with that strange, unexpected good news, he is not here, but he is risen. With that news still ringing in the air and just starting to take root in their hearts, the messengers didn't simply tell them to look ahead into that new world to which they would step out of the tomb, but to look backwards as well, to notice the signs that had been there all along. Remember, they were instructed. Remember what Jesus had said to you when you walked with him in Galilee. Remember how the things that he did and what he had to say were signs of the kind of life that he had now made possible in resurrection. Remember how he told you that the empires of death could not accept him or the new world that he would make possible. And remember how he told you that they were going to kill him for it. But also remember that after 3 days, a whole new paradigm would open up, and that death's power would be overcome in life's glory. The women indeed remembered, and they stepped out of that grave in more sense than one. There was the literal grave that they left, but they also left an entombed kind of life behind as they returned to the 11 apostles and others who were with them, that they might tell them what they had seen and what they had experienced. And as good as that news was, the apostles didn't believe one bit of it. Of course they didn't. And again, I'm not trying to shame or ostracize them either. They still thought that death had the final word. They were still trapped in that old world, in an old paradigm where death's power had the final say. I mean, it must have been heavy for them. Their expectations for a Messiah were not fulfilled. They were the ones left to pick up the pieces of this failed movement. They were the ones who followed the leader who had been silenced in the most ultimate of ways. They had to carry the grief of no longer walking with the one who showed them what love is. Or so they thought. It makes sense, as we know from other Gospels, that the apostles, the disciples, were locked away in a room full of fear and disillusionment and despair. It seems here Luke calls them apostles. It seems an odd thing that he would call them apostles. For an apostle is one who is sent out with good news. But here they are locked away, all together. They weren't going anywhere or doing much of anything. At this point in the story, the 11 and those who were with them had not yet remembered the message. And so when the women told them the news, they simply said, "This is idle talk." They had forgotten what Jesus said, what he had done, and they had forgotten who they were called to be. And every last bit of that makes sense for those who were living in a world where death got the final say. They were yet to realize that this was a new week and that this was the start of a new day. And they did not yet know that all things had been made new. I wonder, for those who are gathered here in the sanctuary, those joining with us online, if you were to take stock, what messages, what are the narratives that play on repeat in your mind? Are they stories of possibility, joy, goodness, community, peace, life? Or when you listen in, do you hear on repeat the old stories of scarcity, there's not enough, defeat, we'll never make it, exclusion, my neighbor is to be feared, or death? Does it still feel like the finality of Good Friday's endings? Or are you still living in the silent sorrow of Holy Saturday? Have you become disillusioned? That any time you hear something that sounds like it's too good to be true, you think, it must be too good to be true. Have you forgotten the news? Have you forgotten who you are? Have you been entombed in the endings and the fears and the worries? Now let me be clear again. If that's you, I'm not blaming or ostracizing you either. Indeed, the world is a scary place right now. We are daily experiencing the dismantling of our public and our governing institutions. Each new day, it feels like the rule of law is on shakier ground than the day before. There is financial uncertainty across the planet. Families and communities have been torn apart by ideological differences. Our planet is in peril, and we are not doing nearly enough to curb the tide. And I could go on and on and on and on and on. Fear and worry, doubt and despair, and with each new day, the pull of death's tomb seems more and more powerful. And through the constant barrage, it might just feel like we're back in the room with the disciples who had just heard the good news that Christ is risen, and all they could hear in it was, sounds like idle talk. Couldn't possibly be true. But the power of death is real indeed, but it is fragile. And if we will linger in that room with the disciples, we will start to notice there are cracks in the wall. Now, Luke doesn't tell us how, and he doesn't let us know why, but as the apostles there collectively doubted and despaired, somehow and from somewhere, Peter was intrigued. He was curious. Something called to him and said, this might be more than just idle talk. Maybe something in him had to hope, even in the midst of doubt. After all, he was still carrying the weight of having betrayed Jesus. Could this be his long-shot chance at a new start? Could this be the path to redemption for him? Or maybe something that he saw in those years of walking with Jesus made him think, who knows, maybe it is true. Or maybe it was something deeper still, even deeper than Peter could have named or given words to, that was drawing him and wooing him. Who knows? Luke didn't tell us why he went to the tomb, but he showed up too. And as he did, he found an empty tomb. It had been just as the women had told him. And Peter must have realized in that moment that this was not going to be like any other day at the start of any other old week. Like the women, he stepped out of the tomb as well, to a wholly different world, to a new paradigm where death no longer has the last word, and where life unfolds and opens and reveals more beauty and more goodness and more life with each new day that is still to come. Peter was amazed, Luke tells us. Amazement is the opposite of despair. There's still room for amazement among us here today. Amazement is simply our whole being responding as we abandon the stifling ways of an old paradigm. In the realization that there is a better way, and it is a paradigm of unending life, and Jesus brings it. Peter left the tomb, and like the women, he entered a world full of life and possibility, even as he stepped back into a world that looked a lot like the old one. I don't know what brings each of you here today. But something quite amazing seems possible. We are gathered here as a community capable of remembering. For some, the Easter story may seem like little more than an old idle tale. But like those faithful women, you too showed up today. There is something wildly intriguing and full of possibility when people show up to the places where they just might get the notion that another world truly is possible. Today, let's remember. Let us remember what Jesus said and what he did. But also in your remembering, remember why you showed up here today. And like the apostles needed to remember, remember who God has made you to be. And remember what time it is. For in a fixed and stifling old world where death reigned, something new emerged. Come to think of it, this morning as we gather, just a few hours past dawn, but it's still the morning of the first day of a new week. And as it was at the start of that week then, we still live in a world made possible by an empty tomb. Christ is risen.
Christ is risen indeed.
Amen.